first thing I want to start with is the situation where you find out about meditation, and take us through when you stumble across the Zen practice, and it leads you to discover meditation, and it just leads you to discover your life's purpose. So I'd love for you to take us through that story to begin with.
Sure, Danny. Yeah, it's one of those, in retrospect, you can see how these things are, so critical. These moments are so critical to defining your entire life, right? And as we look back in our lives, once we get a few years under our belt, you can see some of these moments that are like, wow, I see why that needed to happen. And had that not happened, I would have gone in a completely different path. I'd still be in upstate New York working for the, legacy family business, and I'd be probably a fraction of the man I am today. And so I attribute all that to this experience that you just opened with. Now, the backstory is, which I haven't told many people, and it didn't show up in any of my books, is that my freshman roommate at Colgate, and I know you went to Colgate for a while, so you know what that experience is. And the dorm was like KDR or somewhere. No, that was probably a fraternity. It was Kensington or something like that. At any rate, I had a typical dorm experience as a freshman. I had a freshman roommate, David Bowman, the great guy. And David was an asshole. So I say that in the same breath. He was a great guy, but he was an asshole. Like, he really, really was immature, and he just liked to piss off the girls in our dorm for some reason, and especially the ones who lived underneath us. I remember he brought a dumbbell back from the gym, like literally stole a dumbbell, so we could do dumbbell curls in our room. But he would sit on the top bunk and he would literally throw it onto the floor below us, just in the middle of the night, just to wake up the girls who lived with us. So stupid freshman school stuff. But when I was a competitive swimmer, so I went to Colgate and I swam competitively. So that was kind of my daily thing. And Dave was kind of like, I wonder what I'm going to do. And so he's kind of bumbling around, and then he stumbles into a karate class that was being held in the gym, and he signs up, Shotokan, Japanese karate. So he starts to study karate. And I remember him coming home in his white belt and all sweaty, and then it was yellow belt. And then, I think that first year he made it to like blue belt or whatever the ranking was. And he stuck with it. Now, I didn't live with him after that freshman year, but I would frequently see him. I wasn't super close to him, but I see him around. And by the time he graduated, he was a black belt. Wow. And he had changed. Now, I'm not suggesting that David took up meditation. I don't think he did. But there is a certain amount, as you're aware, of meditative quality to the martial arts, as well as like yoga, right? There's an aspect to it that touches on some aspects of meditation. Concentration, focusing your mind, mental repetition beyond thinking about anything else, right? So you're kind of like greasing the groove of mental patterns and having a neuroplastic effect that's changing your brain when you do those practices. And that's why they're called paths or ways instead of like just learning the combat art. The purpose of a karate do means way, versus like a jujitsu. Jitsu means combat art or combat fighting or some science of fighting, is to cultivate one's mind and spirit through the physical movements of the art, as opposed to just learning how to rip someone's head off. And so I saw him change, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. It was just like he was much more respectful. First of all, he was much more humble. He was quiet. He listened a lot more. He had a look in his eyes that was different, right? And this is all early in his training. So I noted that. I didn't note it in the sense of like, wow, David, you look different. You act different. I just noted it, right? And here I was 4 years later. I wasn't really much of a better swimmer. I was a little bit better, and I was older. Probably the most significant thing that happened to me was my trip to Europe junior year. That definitely changed my perspective and in a sense changed who I was, but nothing compared to what I saw in David. So that's backstory. Now, fast forward, I go down to New York City, your turf, and I've graduated. I've got a job with Coopers and Lybrand, and they're sending me to NYU to get my MBA, all this stuff I wrote about in my book, The Way of the Seal. And I've got to get my CPA. So I've got all these targets, and I'm just like starting to go after them. Learning the new job, learning the whole culture of working in a public accounting consulting firm, all the clients, big industry, financial services, whatnot. A lot of new things coming at me. And I continued working out, and I wasn't satisfied to like watch my body go into decline like a lot of the corporate people that I saw around me, where, that was then, what I was an athlete in college, but that's no more. And now I'm in this white collar trajectory. And so at least back then, it was maybe go to the gym a couple times a week. But for me, I was an athlete, and I wanted to continue to be an athlete. I didn't have to be an Olympian or anything like that, but I wanted to continue running triathlons, and I wanted to continue to evolve. And I had to figure out how to fit that in my schedule. So I woke up early in the morning to go for a run and PT, and then lunchtime when everyone else would go out for lunch, I would go to the gym and I do my version of a high intensity workout, because I had to be in and out in an hour, showered up, back in my suit and back in my office. And then I had to be at school. So they would let us off because we were going to night school, and it was part of our work requirement. They would let us off at 5, which is unheard of because most of our peers were working to 9, 10 o'clock at night. So there's a little bit of resentment, but they let us off at 5, but school didn't start until 7. I figured you had to get something to eat and change and whatever, get down to World Trade Center where NYU Business School was back then. And so I looked at that and said, holy shit, I got 2-hour block, which, take the travel out of that. I really have another hour and 15 minutes to fit something else in. Physical, of course, right? This is the way my mind works. But I wasn't sure what that was going to be. And so until one night I was walking home, and I was walking down 23rd Street. I was living on 22nd and Broadway. And I heard all these shouts coming out of the second floor of this building. And I stopped, and literally I look up, and right above me is this big flag hanging off the front of the building, and it said World Sado Karate Headquarters. And I was like, And then right then I remembered Dave. And so I said, okay, this is interesting. This is a sign. And so I went up into this dojo. It's gorgeous, like 2,000 square foot, beautiful hard wooden floor. And there were about 50 students, just getting sweaty and getting on. And in the middle of the morass or whatever, this fray of energy was this like 5'5", 5'4" Japanese man. And he had a presence about him. It immediately reminded me like of where Dave was going, but it was something really different. And I just stood there and watched for a while. And this guy was like, you didn't want to mess with him. You know what I mean? He was deadly serious. But then suddenly he would crack a joke, and he'd just start laughing like a schoolgirl. You know what I mean? Like cracking himself up. And he was so respectful of all of his students. And yet he was this badass 10th degree black belt, And I found out later, of course, that he was the founder of this style of karate called Sado. And he was a Zen master. And so I joined right away. And I didn't know about the Zen part until like 2 weeks in. I noticed that there was this one class on the schedule on Thursday nights that said meditation. I asked if there was a prerequisite. They said, no, mostly black belts go, but if you want to go, you can go. And so I went as a white belt, and I was the only white belt there. And there were only like 10 other black belts out of hundreds at this school. Like this, how big the school was. And he had students around the world. He had a few 100,000 students around the world already back then. That was 1981 or 85. I'm sorry, 85. So I went to this meditation class, and it was Zen, right? So Zen and the martial arts have a long history. And so he had learned Zen, and it was part and parcel of his martial arts training when he was younger, and he kept it going. And that was a big part of the mind, body, spirit, So the karate can train the body and the mind, and the spirit gets involved. But it's kind of like that saying, you got to find inaction in action and action in inaction. And to find the action in the inaction, you have to stop all the action. And that requires you to sit in silence. Now, you could stand in silence too, but that's a little less comfortable for most people. So we sit in silence, and then you suddenly notice all the action. that's going on in your brain, in your mind. And so there was a very distinct process that he put us through. It's kind of like Zen boot camp. You know, it's painful. And it was hard, and I failed miserably, but I respected him so much that I just kept going. And it was awesome because at the end of these 45-minute sit in silence sessions, he would do a little Zen talk, you know, with his chalkboard, you know, with his white chalk, and he'd write this kanji characters really slowly, and we're all sitting there patiently, and then he would write what it meant in English underneath it, and then he would tell us, you know, he'd tell a story, and I got so much out of those. In fact, a lot of my teaching today, you know, I relate back to some of these principles that he taught. It's really cool. Now, I know I'm going long with this story, but the practice, I did this practice for 4 years. So let me contextualize this: 4 years. Within that 4 years, I finished my MBA. I finished my CPA, became a CPA, had 4 years of solid work experience at Coopers and Lybrand, and then Arthur Andersen. I got my black belt. Now, those 3 certificate kind of external measures of success, CPA, MBA, and black belt, all came to me November of 1989. Wow. And several weeks later, I was on a bus to Officer Candidate School with a guaranteed billet to go to SEAL training afterwards. So something changed. Something dramatic changed in the way I saw the world, the way I saw myself, the way my brain worked, the way my body and brain connected, and my whole experience of life changed dramatically. And it's hard, you know, we would require hours to unpack how and why, right? But it made me so committed. I was so stunned by what was happening to me in terms of the brain opening up, the perspectives I was seeing, that, you know, the excavation of beliefs and stories that weren't serving me, that then replacing them with better stories, and cultivating what I call vision, as opposed to just reacting to life, but creating this vision of what is it that I'm meant for on this planet, as opposed to what do my parents want from me, or what did society want for me to do, or how to act. All that stuff started to come from within. It came from within in terms of a sense of knowingness, a sense of archetypal drive, imagery that would come up spontaneously. And when I started to ask better questions, getting kind of answers to those questions, both through contemplation, journaling, insight. All of this was a result of beginning and sticking to a meditative practice and turning my attention from 100% outward to at least 50% inward, right? It probably, you know, not in a time standpoint, you know, it wasn't like I was spending 50% of my time meditating, but once you turn your attention inward and you keep guiding it inward through the practices, then from a energetic or kind of a metaphysical standpoint, you're really shifting to where you can get to this kind of balance, this 50% balance. And that's like the line between the yin and the yang symbol, 50% inner, 50% outer. And then it becomes like real time where inner and outer are merged. And it was profound. And you know, I'll end the story with this. When I got to SEAL training, you know what happened, right? I showed up with all that experience, and I was, every day I was able to wake up, and the meditation then had become kind of second nature to me. So I would do it, you know, I would get into a state very quickly in the morning through my breath and my posture of my mind. And then I was very clear about where I was going, what I needed to do that day. And the meditation had allowed me to stay radically focused on whatever task they were throwing at me, and to stay non-reactive, which allowed me, I should say, to be an effective leader, because I wasn't so caught up in my drama and reacting. I was really, you know, in the center of it all and being more responsive. And so I graduated as number 1 in my class. Out of 185, we had 19 graduate. I was number 1, and my boat crew, 6 others, were with me that day. It was pretty cool, you know.